Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 291. Hope you guys have had a good weekend. I don't want to waste too much time. I have a lot to cover with you guys today, and I know already that I'm not going to be able to get to everything, but I want to get back into this Oval Office meeting that Donald Trump had with Volodymyr Zelenskyy on Friday. Everyone's still talking about it. It just happened on Friday. And I've had a lot of time to rewatch it and to dissect what happened in that meeting. And I want to break some things down for you today. We're going to get back into that, and I think that it's really important. And then hopefully we'll see, because I have a lot to share with you today. We may have to get back into this on Friday because there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of deception going on. Like I was telling you guys a few podcasts ago, that the most important weapon in war is propaganda, and the propaganda around this Ukraine war is breaking down as people start to learn more about how this war started, what's been going on over there. The propaganda that's being used to support the war is breaking down. I always like to think about the brilliant book, one of my favorite fiction novels, 1984. And if you think about that book, I always talk about the four ministries. The four ministries are very important. You have the Ministry of Peace, which the Ministry of Peace was the Defense Department. They executed war. Oceania was always at war. And that's one of the major themes in the book. In the beginning, Winston he's reflecting on what's going on in his society and his nation being at war with Eurasia. And then at the end of the book, his nation's just seamlessly at war with East Asia. And what Orwell is talking about there is that the enemy, and they were always focused throughout the society of Oceania on the enemy Eurasia, when the party who was in control of the propaganda, that was the other ministry, the Ministry of Truth. Ministry of Truth was in charge of the propaganda. And when the propaganda was focused on Eurasia and told you that Eurasia was your enemy, then you had to hate Eurasia, because we're telling you that's your enemy. And when at the end of the book, when East Asia is the enemy, the party who's in control of the propaganda, the Ministry of Truth, is telling you that your enemy is East Asia now, and you have to hate them. So you have the Ministry of Peace, which executed war. You have the Ministry of Truth, which executed propaganda. You have the Ministry of Plenty. And that brings us back to the budget and we're going to get into the $37 trillion, back into the $37 trillion in debt that we're in, and how the war contributes to that debt. My correlation that there is my premise that there is a correlation between war and debt and peace and prosperity. And Oceania in the book 1984. I didn't even mean to get off on this tangent with 1984, but I love this book, and I think that there's so many parallels from that book and what's going on today. But the Ministry of Plenty was all about the austerity that Oceania was under because of the wars that they were continuing fighting. All the money, all the resources, everything was going to the wars with East Asia and Eurasia. So the Ministry of Plenty was all about the austerity and the rationing of resources that everybody had to sacrifice with these rationing of resources and the austerity because of the war. And then the Ministry of Love always say that we haven't really understood what the Ministry of Love is all about yet. The Ministry of Love is going to be more relatable in our society in the future, probably in the near future. And what's going to bring about the Ministry of Love, the jackboot um, um, thugs that are going to be demanding your compliance. That's coming, according to 1984. So I didn't even mean to get off on the tangent of that book, but there are people that want this war in Ukraine to continue, and I'm going to tell you why they want this war to continue. But I want to get back into this meeting that Trump and his cabinet had with Zelenskyy on Friday. So I want to correct something that I said in the last podcast. When I get stuff wrong and I realize it's wrong, I always want to correct it. And I said in the last podcast that Congress had a approval rating in the teens and that they had an approval rating below 20%. That is not true. This is Real Clear Politics. Real Clear Politics does an average of several polls, and they have Congress's approval rating at 26.6%. See if I can enlarge this for you. 26 point. This is an average. So you see, they're really struggling down here with the Monmouth University poll. They're at 17%. So they are below 20% in this particular poll, but Harvard Harris has Congress as high as 36%. But so the average of these five polls, Real Clear Politics has Congress's approval rating at 26.6% and their disapproval rating at 61.2%. And then you see the spread here. The average spread, red means bad, is negative 34.6%. So this is Congress. And I was wrong. They're not below 20%. They're not in the teens, like I said in the last podcast. Congress has a average approval rating of about 26.6%. Donald Trump's approval rating is average, more polls, but the average in Real Clear Politics is 48.7%. That's Donald Trump's approval rating. Donald Trump's approval rating is almost double the approval rating of Congress. Donald Trump's approval rating, and you look at some of these polls, have him up 51%, 52%, 50. I mean, this is a great approval rating, an average. Look at the spread here. Plus 1.2. His disapproval, 47.5. So, I mean, in a divided country, the way we are politically, this is a pretty good approval rate. Where was Biden? Biden was below 35%. So Donald Trump's approval rating is double what Congress's approval rating is. Double. So Zelenskyy, when he came over on Friday morning, he came over to meet with the President of the United States. He didn't come over to meet with Congress. I mean, these guys have been meeting with him and fawning over him, for years. There was no need for Zelenskyy to come into the United States. And the very first thing he does is he goes and he meets with members of Congress. He should have gone and maybe cleared his head or something, at the hotel, maybe meet with his people to work out what they were going to say, what they were going to do. But no, he goes and he meets with members of Congress that morning before he goes to the White House. And like I told you, they put batteries in his back. They told him what to say. And then he goes to the White House. He's actually late getting to the White House because he went and he met with these members of Congress first. This is Chris Murphy. We're going to talk a lot about Chris Murphy here in a moment. But Chris Murphy tweeted this out after they met with him. Members of Congress met with him before he goes to the White House. And Chris Murphy says, just finished a meeting with President Zelenskyy here in Washington. So Zelenskyy, he's coming. The whole reason that he's coming to the United States is to sign this deal that he's agreed to. President Trump has sent members of his cabinet over to Ukraine and have been working out this deal with him. And he agreed to the deal in Ukraine. And he's going to come over to the United States specifically to work out this. I mean, not even to work out the deal. The deal was already worked out with Trump's foreign policy team in Ukraine. He was just only going to come over and sign the deal. That was why he was coming over, and it was to meet with Trump, not to meet with these members of Congress. I don't even know why he went. He had this meeting with members of Congress first things first before he went to meet with the president of the United States, because you're not here for that. But Chris Murphy, who was in that meeting, who's the senator of Connecticut, he tweets out right after that meeting, just finished the meeting with President Zelenskyy here in Washington. He confirmed that the Ukrainian people will not support a fake peace agreement with where Putin gets everything he wants, and there is no security agreements for Ukraine. He agreed. What do you mean he agreed? This is what you guys told him to say. These members of Congress, they're the ones, again, who put batteries in his back, who put the fire under him to not accept a fake. This is what Chris Murphy called. Now, Chris Murphy's a member of Congress, and the president of the United States, Donald Trump, is trying to do foreign policy, his foreign policy. The executive branch is responsible for making foreign policy, Chris Murphy, not the legislative branch. And Donald Trump, he was elected to execute the foreign policy that he wants to execute. And it's a shame that you have members of Congress undermining the president of the United States while he's trying to negotiate a peace deal. Chris Murphy, right after this meeting, that he confirmed, Zelenskyy confirmed that the Ukrainian people will not support a fake peace agreement. Why do you got to call it a fake peace agreement? Why are you undermining the president of the United States who's trying to negotiate a peace agreement? Well, first of all, politically, it's not expedient for Democrats for President Trump to work out a peace deal. If you remember, what's his name, Alan Lichtman, his 13 keys to calling the presidential elections. He called this past election wrong, thank God, because he called that Kamala Harris was going to win the election. But if you look at his 13 keys, just because he got this last election wrong, that doesn't mean that all of his 13 keys, are invalid. And there is not, some, I personally don't think that his system was wrong. I just think that he was so much of a partisan that he wasn't being honest about the keys. But one of Alan Lichtman's 13 keys, and Alan Lichtman is a historian. I mean, he's not a election forecaster. His trade is history. That's how he came up with this system, is because he's a historian. And studying history, that's how he came up with these keys. And one of the keys is a foreign policy failure and a foreign policy success. That politically, if Donald Trump is able to negotiate peace in Ukraine, politically, that is a foreign policy success for Donald Trump. Politically, when he goes into the election next year in the midterms, and he's got that to hang on, to and able to campaign, and Republicans are able to campaign that he brought peace. That the foreign policy success is a huge political advantage for Donald Trump. And these guys, this is just one reason that they're undermining him and are trying to be roadblocks to a peace deal, is because politically it's not expedient for them, for Trump to negotiate a peace deal. That's a huge political win. Another example, in Lichtman's keys, the key foreign policy win and then foreign policy failure. You look at Joe Biden in his term in office. Joe Biden started off with huge approval rating. His popularity was it was over what Trump's is now. I mean, he was over 50% when he was first elected in those first months. When did Joe Biden start to decline and never really recover from in his approval rating, and that was after the Afghanistan debacle, the foreign policy failure. I also believe that it had something to do with him doing the vaccine mandate, which the vaccine mandate that Joe Biden was trying to do through OSHA, it kind of coincided with the failure in Afghanistan, but that contributed to his poll numbers declining, and he never really recovered after the Afghanistan pullout, foreign policy failure. So foreign policy success is a huge political advantage to Donald Trump, especially when he ran on it. And if he's able to bring peace, then that's going to be a huge win for Donald Trump. So that's one motivation for Chris Murphy and others, Amy Klobuchar, even Lindsey Graham. If anybody trusts this snake, after that meeting, he comes out and he says that Zelenskyy needs to resign and all this stuff. This guy is such a snake. Lindsey Graham, nobody's falling for this guy's con. But you have Klobuchar here, you have Chris Coons here, all Democrats, and Lindsey Graham, whatever you believe he is, and Chris Murphy just got out of this meeting, and Zelenskyy confirmed. What does that mean? Confirmed that the Ukrainian people will not support fake peace agreement where Putin gets everything he wants and there is no security agreements. What do you mean security? And they keep talking about these security agreements. And Zelenskyy calls them guarantees. At least Murphy here is calling them security agreements. Zelenskyy calling them guarantees. Nothing's guaranteed in this world. Who's going to guarantee our security? Can't guarantee anything. What's wrong with you? So this was Chris Murphy, this same Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, and he was on the CNN Sunday show yesterday. And I want you to, he's asked directly about this meeting that members of Congress had with Zelenskyy before he went into the Oval Office. I want you to listen to what he says.
Also, Senator Graham said that he was trying to help Zelenskyy before he went to the Oval Office, coaching him what to say, what not to say. Were you part of those conversations?
Well, I can't speak to every conversation that Senator Graham had, but yes, I met with President Zelenskyy that morning, and President Zelenskyy was ready to sign that minerals agreement, no matter how insufficient it was. But
no matter how insufficient it was. What are you talking about, Chris Murphy? You tweeted out right after that he confirmed that he will not support. Now, this is a peace agreement, but the minerals deal it was tied to the peace agreement, and that's what Trump was trying to explain to him. But listen to what Chris Murphy's saying. She says that Senator Graham said that you guys tried to coach Zelenskyy on what to say. Why does Congress need to coach Zelenskyy on what to say when he goes into the Oval Office? He shouldn't have even met with them. He should have came straight to the United States and went straight to the Oval Office. Again, he was late because he was over meeting with Congress. Why did they have to coach him what to say? And Chris Murphy, he admits that, yeah, we met with him. We coached him what to say.
Couple things. One is I want you to react to that, but also Senator Graham said that he was trying to help Zelenskyy before he went to the Oval Office, coaching him what to say, what not to say. Were you part of those conversations?
Well, I can't speak to every conversation that Senator Graham had, but yes, I met with President Zelenskyy that morning, and President Zelenskyy was ready to sign that minerals agreement, no matter how insufficient it was, but had an obligation to have a conversation with the President of the United States about the disaster that would be wrought for Ukraine if they signed an agreement that didn't have Zelenskyy at the table and trusted Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is not to be trusted.
Vladimir Putin is not to be trusted. Vladimir Putin's not to be trusted. So he says that yeah, I coached Zelenskyy. I told him what to say when he went in the Oval Office. He wasn't the only one. Klobuchar, Chris Coons, Lindsey Graham, probably others told him, when you go in there, this is what you say. And again, if you watch the video, if you watch the whole interaction there in the Oval Office, Zelenskyy comes in hot. He comes in hot with an attitude because he had met with these guys before that are trying to undermine Trump's peace deal. And so Zelenskyy comes in and he says that Zelenskyy had every right to have a conversation about the deal. Well, they didn't have to have the conversation right there in the Oval Office with the cameras there. Now, people are blaming Donald Trump for having that sit down in the Oval Office. Well, Donald Trump, has been hosting foreign leaders all week. He had Macron there early in the week. They sat down in the Oval Office in those same yellow chairs with the press and had interactions with the press. You had Keir Starmer from the British Prime Minister, came a few days after that, sat in those same yellow chairs, had interactions with the press. And then Zelenskyy comes a day later, 2 days later, and he gives Zelenskyy the same treatment, brings him in the Oval Office, sits him there in the chairs with the press, asks him questions. And if Zelenskyy had concerns about this agreement, he should have waited till they were in private. There was a private lunch that was scheduled after that. Zelenskyy could have waited until they were in private to have all of this discussions that Chris Murphy says that Zelenskyy had every right to raise. Yeah, he had the right to raise it, but you have to raise it there in the Oval Office with the cameras there.
That Senator Graham had. But yes, I met with President Zelenskyy that morning, and President Zelenskyy was ready to sign that minerals agreement, no matter how insufficient it was, but had an obligation to have a conversation with the President of the United States about the disaster that would be wrought for Ukraine.
He didn't have to have that conversation. He had the obligation to have that conversation with President Trump. He could have done that in private. He decided to litigate it there, like J.D. Vance accused him of, there in the Oval Office, and that's why things blew up. Now, who's this guy, Chris Murphy? Let's talk about Chris Murphy. Again, he is the senator from Connecticut. One of the two senators, Richard Blumenthal, is the other, and Chris Murphy is I'm not sure if he's the junior senator, but he's a senator from Connecticut. Chris Murphy was there in Ukraine. He's there from the beginning, from the very start of this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and the United States and Russia, and the EU and Russia. Back in 2013, people keep referring to 2014, and this all started in 2014. No, this started in 2013. In December of 2013 is when this started, and this is December of 2013 when Chris Murphy, John McCain are on the stage there during the Euromaidan protests. They went over there from the ground level of this protest to encourage the people there protesting to continue the protest, continue the uprising against their own government. Think about that. I want you to think about if this was happening in Mexico. I want you to think about if this is happening in Canada. And there was an uprising in Mexico, uprising in Canada, and the people were protesting. And Russia sent members from their Duma over to Mexico, over to Canada, to tell the protesters to keep protesting. Now, you support, we're the United States. We support whatever government is there in Mexico. And these people are protesting, and they're demonstrating against the government that we support, our neighboring country. This is our neighbor, our southern border, and we support the government that is in power. And there's a protest uprising against that government, and two members from the Duma come over and tell the protesters to keep up the protest. The people back in Russia, we support your protests, and we're going to contribute to your protest. And if you're the government that the Americans that they support, if they do anything to break up your protest, we're going to sanction them, and we have your back, and to keep up the protest. That's what Chris Murphy and John McCain did there in December of 2013, in the very beginning, in the infancy of this conflict. This is Klitschko in the phone call that we listened to a few podcasts ago. That is the leaked phone call that was likely leaked from Russia, with Victoria Nuland talking to the American ambassador to Ukraine at the time under the Obama administration, Jeffrey Pratt, and the secret conversation that they're having, which was made public, where they're talking about who's going to be the interim government after the coup d'etat. And Victoria Nuland is telling Pratt that Klitschko, I don't think Klitsch, she calls him Klitsch. I don't think Klitsch should go into government. This is Klitsch right here, Klitschko. This is John McCain, Chris Murphy, there, Euromaidan, December 2013. And this is Oli Tonnybrook. Oli Tonnybrook is also who Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pratt are talking about in that conversation. Oli Tonnybrook was the creator of this large movement in Ukraine called Swoboda, far-right neo-nationalist, neo-Nazi group, Swoboda, Oli Tonnybrook. And you see Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, this guy who met with Zelenskyy, told him what to say before he went to the Oval Office. He's there in the infancy of this conflict, encouraging these people. Now, I was talking about, think about if this is Mexico, if this is Canada, and members from the Duma came over. A few weeks ago, Germany had their election, and Elon Musk went over to Germany and he gave a speech, and he endorsed the ADF. ADF is the alternative for Deutschland, alternative for Germany. They call them a far right group, but they're basically MAGA in Germany. they basically want to curb immigration. They want to keep their German culture. And Elon Musk went over there and he gave a speech, just like the speech that John McCain and Chris Murphy are giving here to the people of Ukraine. And the new chancellor in Germany said that was meddling, that Elon Musk was meddling in German politics just by going over there and giving a speech. Well, if that was meddling, what is this? And notice how that it's bipartisan from the beginning, that when this thing starts over, these are the first two senators that go over there, and one Democrat, one Republican. So they're sending the message that this is bipartisan from the beginning, and this was planned from the beginning, and this is under the Obama administration. This is meddling. We are the ones who broke the Budapest Agreement, because if you read the Budapest Agreement, the agreement that Bill Clinton makes is that they're going to allow Ukraine to be sovereign, and that Russia would allow them to be sovereign, but then also the United States would allow them to be sovereign. People are trying to make the claim that Russia broke the agreement of the Budapest memorandum, that Russia broke it when they invaded Crimea. And I showed you in the last podcast how they invaded Crimea. There was no invasion of Crimea. That's ridiculous. Russia has a naval base in Crimea. How are they going to invade Crimea and break the Budapest Agreement? That's retarded. But if anyone broke the Budapest Agreement and the Budapest Memorandum, it is the United States when they meddled in Ukrainian politics, when they were having this conflict there, and John McCain and Chris Murphy went over there and meddled, and they weren't the only ones that went over there. I'm going to show you. I mean, we had our CIA over there. We had our State Department over there. We were over there meddling in their politics. We were over there rigging their politics to the direction that we wanted to. These were just the faces that were there on the stage, but there were a lot of other things going on behind the scenes there at the end of 2013 and the beginning of 2014. But John McCain, Chris Murphy, standing with Oli Tonnybrook, the Nazi, there on the stage at Euromaidan. Oli Tonnybrook. He's the founder of Swoboda. Who's Swoboda? This is Swoboda. Oh, this is Mama here, Victoria Nuland. In the phone call, the leaked phone call that she's having with Jeffrey Pratt, she's talking about Oli Tawny book, that he should be on the outside. Klitschko, I don't think he should go into the government. I think the new prime minister should be Arseniy Yatsenyuk. She calls him Yaks. So she says Yaks, she's talking about Arseniy Yatsenyuk. When she says Klitsch, she's talking about Klitschko. And this is Tawny book. So this is Victoria Nuland from Obama's State Department here with all the guys from the phone call. We were there meddling in their politics from the beginning. This is Swoboda.
For Ukrainian nationalists, January 1st is one of the most important days in their calendar. It marks the birth of Stepan Bandera, the leader of the Ukrainian partisan forces during the Second World War. The rally was organized by the far-right Svoboda Party. Protesters marched amidst a river of torches and signs saying, "Ukraine above all else." But for many in Ukraine and abroad, Bandera's legacy is controversial. His group, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, sided with Nazi German forces before breaking with them later in the war.
So Bandera's group, this group that Swoboda reveres, and they have an annual fire torch march. The group that Bandera was a part of was part of the SS and the Nazis, and this Swoboda group reveres them and has an annual march to celebrate them. Interesting.
His group, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, sided with Nazi German forces before breaking with them later in the war. Western historians also say that his followers carried out massacres of Polish and Jewish civilians.
Look at this. Look
but
at
for
this.
many of his
Look
supporters,
at how many people
he
there
is a
are.
symbol of Ukraine's struggle for independence.
They try to tell you that only a small Piers Morgan had this interaction on his. Look at this. Look at this. Look how many people there are. Look how many people there are that revere Bandera, the Nazi. Look at this. This is Swoboda. So, Tawny Brook, this guy, Oli Tawny Brook, this guy who John McCain and Chris Murphy on stage with right here. That's him. Oli Tawny Brook, John McCain, Chris Murphy standing next to him. He's the guy who created this group, Swoboda. This is Swoboda, people. This is Swoboda. Look at this. Look at this.
Jewish civilians. But for many of his supporters, he is a symbol of Ukraine's struggle for independence.
This year is the 105th anniversary of his birthday. Every year since 2006, Swoboda marches on the 1st of January in memory of him and to spread his ideas. The ideas are very simple: to leave it an independent country where Ukrainians will be the owners of their motherland.
So he says every year since 2006. If you know, the Orange Revolution happened in 2004. What's his name? Viktor Yushchenko becomes president after the Orange Revolution in 2004. And Viktor Yushchenko, he makes Bandera's birthday a national holiday. So that's why it's every year since 2006. This shouldn't surprise anyone that there's all of these neo-Nazis there in Ukraine. And I shared this with you in the last podcast, that Congress, the reason Obama was not able to send weapons to Ukraine, and in the Oval Office meeting, I have a clip of it if we get to it, when Trump got into it with Zelenskyy. He says, Obama sent sheets. I sent javelins. Obama sent sheets. And it's actually the line was Obama sent blankets, but Obama didn't send javelins. Obama didn't send weapons. And the reason he didn't send weapons is because Congress said, no, we're not sending weapons to the neo-Nazis. There's so many neo-Nazis there that we're not sending weapons to the neo-Nazis. And then they had to lift that. So this shouldn't surprise anyone that John McCain early on and Chris Murphy, that they went over there and they worked with these Nazis. They were working with these Nazis to put in the new government. The Nazis are who? Victoria Nuland is talking about when she's on the phone call, who's going to be the new government. And this is only the interim government because they had to have an interim government after the coup before they had elections. So this is who they're talking about. They were working with the Nazis to stage the coup. There's Victoria Nuland. These are the two that were on the secret phone call that was leaked. This is Victoria Nuland. This is Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt. And they're walking around during Euromaidan with the crowd, handing out sweets, meddling in Ukrainian politics, helping them overthrow the government. Victoria Nuland, Jeffrey Pyatt. This is Yahoo Finance. Actually comes from Business Insider. But John McCain went to Ukraine and stood on stage with the man accused of being an anti-Semitic neo-Nazi. You see the picture here, Holy Tani Book, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, John McCain. See the date here, December 16th, 2013. December 16th, 2013. So this is when Chris Murphy and John McCain were there in December of 2016 or 2013. I say 2016, 2013, December 16 of 2013, not 2014. This started in 2013 in December. And that's when they were there standing with the Nazis, working with the Nazis, John McCain. All right. I want you to listen to this clip. And this talks about Chris Murphy and John McCain going over to Ukraine in December of 2013.
The European Union cut off trade talks with Ukraine today, saying the former Soviet republic's term.
Gotta point this out in this news report, this CBS news report. The very first thing that he says in this report is that the European Union, the EU, cut off trade talks with Ukraine. I want you to listen to him say that again. That the European Union cut off trade talks with Ukraine.
The European Union cut off trade talks with Ukraine today, saying the former Soviet republic's terms have, quote, no grounds in reality.
So the European Union, very first thing you need to realize in this clip and what he says here, the very first thing that you got to understand is that the president of Ukraine at this time is Viktor Yanukovych. And everybody is saying that Viktor Yanukovych was a Russian puppet, that he did whatever Vladimir Putin said, and he didn't have any autonomy. He was connected to Russia. He was a Russian president. But if you listen to this report from CBS, you'll hear that this Russian puppet was actually in negotiations with the EU. If he was so much in the pocket of Putin and did whatever Putin said, why is he even negotiating with the EU? Why is he even in trade talks with the EU at all if he is Russian, if he's a Russian puppet president? Talking about Viktor Yanukovych. So the fact that he's in negotiations with the EU means that you'd have to be crazy to say Yanukovych was a Russian-backed president. He's trying to negotiate a trade deal with the EU, and the EU's the one that cut off the trade deal because they said Ukraine's demands were too high. Let's listen to it again.
The European Union cut off trade talks. The European Union cut off trade talks with Ukraine today, saying the former Soviet republic's terms have, quote, no grounds in reality. That development fired up protesters in the capital city of Kiev, who were joined this afternoon by Republican Senator John McCain of Arizona and Democrat Chris Murphy of.
So the crowd there in Maidan, the thing that brought them out is because, and the reason that they started protesting there in Maidan, and this is the infancy, this is December 2013, this is the beginning of the coup d'etat that led to the conflict that's going on today. The reason that these people went out and took to the streets is because their president, who was democratically elected, was negotiating a trade deal with the EU, and those trade talks with the EU fell through. So they hit the streets and they started protesting. And then John McCain and Chris Murphy immediately come over here and they encourage the protests. They encourage them to keep up the protest and say, America's got your back. America's going to support you. Meddling in their politics. Now, Yanukovych had the right, because he was democratically elected, to work out any trade deal that he wants. And he was trying to negotiate with the EU and work out a trade deal with them. But I mean, you hear what they say in the CBS report, that the EU said that the terms that Ukraine wanted were ridiculous. If you listen to George Soros will even tell you that Putin outbid this. We're talking about business. We're talking about trade here. We're talking about two sovereign countries trying to work out trade deals that benefit them and their people. If you listen to George Soros, he even admits that Russia came in and offered a more favorable deal than the deal that the EU was offering. Take a listen.
Basically, the rise of civil society that spontaneously rebelled against a continuation when the association agreement was offered, and then Putin outbid the European Union, which wasn't very difficult, and offered $15 billion. And Yanukovych then made a deal with Putin.
So what he says is that Yanukovych was negotiating with, he says the same thing that's in this CBS report. Yanukovych was negotiating with the EU. The EU, they weren't offering favorable terms. So that negotiation with the EU fell through. And then Putin offers a more favorable deal of $15 billion. Also, Putin did the interview that he did with Tucker Carlson. He says that not only did we offer Ukraine a more favorable deal, we told Yanukovych that if you do the deal with the EU, then we're shutting off our borders. We're not going to allow any of your EU products, because we don't want EU products to flood into Russia. So if you do the deal with the EU, then we're shutting off our borders for trade, not for visiting or going across the border, but for trade. We're not going to allow any goods from Ukraine to come across the border in Russia. So Yanukovych is calculating this for his people, that Russia's offering us a better deal, $15 billion. If we go with Russia, then they're not going to shut off their borders. And the deal that the EU is trying to give us is not a favorable deal. I mean, that's all business. That's all business. And for our politicians to go over there, first of all, for these people to hit the streets over this trade deal that your elected president is trying to work out. If you don't like the trade deal that he's working out, you go to the polls, you vote him out in the next election. You don't hit the streets and then commit all the violence that ensues after Euromaidan. But we're over there meddling the whole time. Chris Murphy, John McCain, over there meddling. And then the violence does break out. Yanukovych has to flee. If you know what happened with Euromaidan, then, I mean, I want you to listen to this clip. This is a clip from about a year ago. It says 8 months ago, Joe Rogan show, and the now director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was on the show, and they talk about this segment on Comedy Central, on the Colbert Report, when that used to be on Comedy Central after the Daily Show. And this is back in 2014. And this guy right here, this guy's name is Gideon Rose. Gideon Rose is a former editor from Foreign Affairs and former member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He served as associate director of Near East and South Asian Affairs. So during the Clinton administration. So Gideon Rose is on the Colbert Report, and they're talking about this segment on Joe Rogan show with Tulsi Gabbard. Take a listen.
And this was in 2014. And he was on the Colbert Report back when it was on Comedy Central. And he was essentially bragging about how they are trying to lure the Ukraine. We'll play it for you just so you can watch it.
I did not see this.
Gideon Rose. It's crazy. It's crazy. First of all, before we play it, here's one of the things that's crazy about it is that they're essentially bragging openly about foreign policy shenanigans that are just designed to try to undermine Russia. And they're doing it on Comedy Central in a joking way while this guy's selling a book. And this guy, we'll play it so you see. What does he do again, Jamie? What is his position?
Foreign Affairs is a...
Foreign Affairs Magazine is the magazine for the Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay, so let's listen to him.
Fix this mess. Here to tell me how to reanimate Reagan is the editor of Foreign Affairs Magazine, Gideon Rose. Mr. Rose, thank you so much for being here. There's the magazine, Foreign Affairs. Now, Gideon, help me out here. We've got a battle. The Ukraine, some of them want to go into the EU, the European Union.
Right.
And some of them want to stay with Russia. If the Ukraine's not in Europe right now, what continent is it on?
Well, it's part of Eurasia, but it's part of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet bloc. It's basically Robin to Russia's Batman. And the challenge here is to try to attract it to the West, to get it to flip sides.
So the rebels in the streets, what are they fighting?
The challenge here is to get it to flip sides. So that's why John McCain and Chris Murphy are over there. That's the objective, is to get Ukraine to flip sides. And that's what this is about. So he's admitting that in this little Comedy Central segment.
They're fighting for a better future. Countries have a development.
That sounds like a political speech.
No, but it's actually...
Even Colbert says they're fighting for a better future. And even Colbert says that sounds like BS.
to the West, to get it to flip sides.
So the rebels in the streets, what are they fighting for?
They're fighting for a better future. Countries have a development.
That sounds like a political speech.
No, but it's actually true. Countries have to develop over time. And Ukraine, basically, after the end of the Soviet Union, faced two tracks. It could stay a sort of stagnant, corrupt, authoritarian country tied to Russia, or it could essentially join the West. It could modernize, liberalize, become a democracy. At the last minute, when it looked like it was going to trade up from its sort of abusive relationship with its boyfriend from the hood to a nice yuppie.
You're not loading these choices in any way whatsoever.
It's actually true. When it looked like it was going to trade up to a better environment, at the last minute, Putin offered a bribe.
How much?
$15 billion.
So he calls it a bribe. And it wasn't a bribe. I mean, it's the same thing that George Soros is talking about here, that it was a negotiation going on with the EU and with Russia for a trade deal. And yes, Yanukovych was asking for more from the EU, because if Russia's going to shut down their borders and Russia's promising me $15 billion, you're going to have to come to the table with more. If you want to make this deal, the EU could not match what Putin was offering. It wasn't a bribe, but this is what he's talking about here when he says that Putin offered a bribe. It's a business. It's a trade deal.
It's actually true. When it looked like it was going to trade up to a better environment, at the last minute, Putin offered a bribe.
How much?
$15 billion.
That's a lot of cash,
It's a lot of cash. And the president, who himself was tied to the old elites and the eastern part of the country with ties to Russia.
So the president that was tied to the old elites, that's them trying to say that Yanukovych was Putin's puppet. He was in the pocket of Putin. No, he wasn't in the pocket of Putin. If he was in the pocket of Putin, if he was Putin's puppet, he wouldn't have even been negotiating with the EU. He gave the EU the ability to outbid the deal that Putin was made. It doesn't mean that Yanukovych was in the pocket of Putin or that he's a Putin puppet just because he went with the more favorable deal for his country.
For a bribe.
How much?
$15 billion.
That's a lot of cash,
It's a lot of cash. And the president, who himself was tied to the old elites and the eastern part of the country with ties to Russia, decided to back off the change and go join Russia.
Do you know how many pirate-themed restaurants you can buy with $15 billion?
The problem was the western parts of the country and the younger parts of the country and the more modern liberal parts of the country basically knew that they had no future being Russia's vassal. So they took to the streets.
Is America taking sides in this in any way? If these people, the rebels are winning.
Americans are taking sides. Americans take sides from the beginning, from the very infancy of this protest. When he says that the people from Eastern Ukraine or from Western Ukraine, the people that are more associated with the EU, the people that hit the streets during Euromaidan, the people that were there during the protest, that those people, that they are the ones, these people that Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Platt are they're handing out sweets and candies. These people that are protesting, that Open Society brought most of these people out there, and other NGOs, but George Soros, brought these people out there. These are the people that hit the streets, and they protest against the trade deal that Yanukovych decides to make with Russia, because Russia's making a more favorable deal. They start to protest, and then, yes, we go over there and we pick sides. We're encouraging the protest. We're encouraging them to keep up the fight.
Now, right?
Yes, just recently.
Why isn't Obama spiking the ball in the end zone and calling Putin and saying, hey, you might have won the medal count, but we won the country count, biatch?
It's actually a very good question, and the answer is that we don't want Russia to intervene and kick over the table like a game of Risk and take Ukraine back. And so
would they do that? Could he send in troops?
Yes, he could. So we are choosing...
Does Ukraine have any troops of their own? Would they fight back?
Yes, but we don't want this to escalate, and we don't want Russia to crack down. So we want to basically distract Russia. Oh, look, you have the highest medal count. Oh, you did really well. And focus on the Olympics.
Here's a shiny object.
So what did this goes back to what Angela Merkel says. After all this it happens and they enter into the peace talks, the peace negotiations, Angela Merkel, who was the chancellor of Germany at the time, says that those peace negotiations were only an attempt to distract Russia. So Ukraine has time to build up their arms. I mean, this goes back to that.
Distract Russia. Oh, look, you have the highest medal count. Oh, you did really well. And focus on the Olympics.
Here's a shiny object. We'll just take an entire country away from you.
Basically.
Okay.
Jeez.
Wild.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It's just wild that's like a humorous thing that everybody thought was outside the realm of possibility.
And people are dying now.
And now
a lot of people.
Here we are.
Right. Right.
8 years.
So she's the new DNI. She's the new DNI. So interesting. This is Chris Murphy on C-SPAN, and I want you to listen to what Chris Murphy says here.
I think it was our role, including sanctions and threats of sanctions, that forced, in part, Yanukovych from office. Now, the question is, what can we do to support this?
We forced Yanukovych from office, is what he says. Yanukovych was the democratically elected president in Ukraine. We forced him from office, is what Chris Murphy says.
I think it was our role, including sanctions and threats of sanctions, that forced, in part, Yanukovych from office. Now, the question is, what can we do to support this new government? There's going to be a lot of talk about an assistance package. With respect to Ukraine, we have not sat on the sidelines. We have been very much involved. Members of the Senate who have been there, members of the State Department who have been on the square. The Obama administration passed sanctions. The Senate was prepared to pass its own set of sanctions. And as I said, I really think that the clear position of the United States has in part been what has helped lead to this change in regime. So I know
we changed the regime. The part of the United States that we played from the beginning at the square. What square is he talking about? This square, a Euromaidan. The part that we played at the square, Euromaidan, outlining our position, threatening sanctions on Yanukovych, that we caused the regime change. He's admitting it.
that there is merit in the claim that the United States sort of has these principles and then we selectively apply them. We get involved in certain places and then we don't get involved in other places. But I think if ultimately this is a peaceful transition to a new government in Ukraine, it'll be the United States on the streets of Ukraine who will be seen as a great friend in helping make that transition happen. This is really about supporting one of the biggest, most important countries in the Eurasian region, be able to determine for themselves what their future is. And it looks to
determine for themselves what their future is. What are you talking about? You're determining what their future is. You're there guiding everything. You're there setting it up. You're determining, you're intervening in their politics. You're setting up and determining what their future is. The people are not determining what their future is. This isn't about democracy. Viktor Yanukovych was democratically elected. You guys plotted to oust him, plotted to change the regime. You're admitting to that, Chris Murphy. And now this guy is the one that Zelenskyy goes and meets with, and he tells Zelenskyy what to say before he goes into the Oval Office with the President of the United States. You guys understand what's going on here?
This is the United States and Russia once again fighting, maybe not in military terms, but on economic terms in a country.
The United States and Russia fighting again, not on military terms, but economic terms. Listen.
Be able to determine for themselves what their future is. And it looks to people like this is the United States and Russia once again fighting, maybe not in military terms, but on economic terms in a country that we both care about. But really, ultimately, I think this is about us supporting the wishes of Ukraine. And, there is a U.S. interest here. We are in the middle of negotiating a new trade agreement with Europe. To my state, it's enormously important. We do 40% of our trade in Connecticut with Europe. If Ukraine is part of the European Union and thus is part of this new trade agreement with the United States, that could result in billions of dollars in new economic opportunities for the U.S. So we do have an economic interest in the Ukraine being part of the European Union, and we shouldn't be shy about making clear that interest.
Isn't it true that Yanukovych was elected for the first time in 2010 for one 5-year term? That elections were scheduled for 2015. The second point is, why is it okay for foreign ministers from other countries to show up during protest movements, let's say in Ukraine, like the foreign ministers of Poland and Germany, and support the protesters against the current government there? Wouldn't it be something similar to the foreign ministers of, let's say, Mexico and Canada showing up during the Occupy Wall Street movement and saying, yes, we agree that your government is corrupt?
Absolutely.
And the third point is, why isn't the West and America talking about the fact that a large or significant portion of the Ukrainian opposition right now is made up of
Nazis,
far-right
Nazis,
politicians, including from the party Svoboda, which openly is fascist and xenophobic, and they say that they don't want to join the EU because they consider the EU to be a bunch of gays and Jews.
This guy sat there with the leader of Svoboda. He sat there on stage with the leader of Svoboda. What's he going to say to that?
Just as well as they say that they don't want to join the imperialist Moscow regime.
Let me take all those very quickly, one at a time. You're right. Yanukovych was elected, and I mentioned this before. I understand the difficult position here, which is that Yanukovych was elected, and we are not in the business of encouraging rebellions and revolutions on the streets against elected leaders, because we ultimately think that elections,
but that's what you did,
are the place in which
But that's what you did. But that's what you did. You did that. Yanukovych was elected, and you supported the coup d'etat. So how is that democracy? Listen to this guy ramble.
Elected, and we are not in the business of encouraging rebellions and revolutions on the streets against elected leaders, because we ultimately think that elections, as you mentioned, are the place in which you should settle your differences. The issue here is that Yanukovych lost his legitimacy to govern when he used force to try to break up these protests. And the United States...
That was CIA that made it look like CIA hired people to shoot at protesters. And I've said this before, I don't have time to go into it now, but if you find out who started the shooting in February and started shooting at both, someone started shooting at both the protesters and the Yanukovych protesters, those are the provocateurs. Those are the agitators. Those are the ones who sowed the discord. That was an intelligence operation that started the violence. The protests were going on for weeks and weeks, peaceful, but as long as the protests were peaceful, then you're not going to get the coup d'etat that you want. You need the protests to turn violent, and the protests turned violent on one day when some individuals started shooting at both sides.
Encouraging rebellions and revolutions on the streets against elected leaders, because we ultimately think that elections, as you mentioned.
And that's what our intelligence agencies do. That's what they've been doing around the world since the 1950s. I'm sorry.
Or the place in which you should settle your differences. The issue here is that Yanukovych lost his legitimacy to govern when he used force to try to break up these protests. And the United States didn't go on to that square in any meaningful way until the president tried to break up the peaceful protests. That's why
a lie. That's a lie. You guys were there on the square while it was peaceful. You guys were there on the square from the beginning, from the ground level in December 16th. It says right here, December 16th. John McCain went to Ukraine and stood on the stage with men accused of being anti-Semitic Nazis. That was in December. There was no violence in December. And he's trying to say that we went there after the violence started. That's a lie, Chris Murphy.
Issue here is that Yanukovych lost his legitimacy to govern when he used force to try to break up these protests. And the United States didn't go on to that square in any meaningful way until the president tried to break up the peaceful
protests.
Lie. That's why Senator McCain and I went. And we certainly got a lot of grief from people asking why 2 U.S. senators are going to the square to support a protest movement against an elected government. We did that because we think that there were human rights and civil rights that were violated there, and we've always stood up for that, for that concept. And again, I think that answers your second question as to why you had foreign ministers and foreign leaders who were on that square. It was because we're standing up for the idea that people should be able to lodge protests against their government. You are right that there is an element of the opposition that has some real radical ideas, and there is an element of anti-Semitism that was present on that square. I will tell you from having been there, if there were 500,000 people there, maybe a couple thousand of them represented that viewpoint. And
but listen, yes, but the couple of thousand, and you're right, most of the square was peaceful. And I've always related it to Black Lives Matter, that Black Lives Matter protest in 2020, most of the Black Lives Matter protests were peaceful in the daytime. And then in the nighttime, they started looting, they started burning down things. It was still a small minority of people. And that's what really discredited the movement. But that's what happened at Euromaidan. Most of the protests were peaceful, but the minority of radical neo-Nazis that were there at the square, they're the ones who were committed to the violence. They were the ones who forced the massive violence that forced Yanukovych to flee under that violence. And yes, they were a minority, but their impact on the coup d'etat cannot be understated. There would have been no coup d'etat without the violence. I had a lot more that I wanted to share with you guys. Like I said, I knew I wasn't going to get to all this stuff. Didn't even get back into the Oval Office meeting and break that down the way I wanted to. So most likely get back to this on Friday. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on Friday.